Bilateral cooperation has been fairly disastrous. We've seen countries use export restrictions on medical equipment, which works to the detriment of everyone given integrated global supply chains. We've seen political sniping at the WHO undermine efforts to mount a pandemic response. For example, the group of 20 health ministers were unable to issue a communique in April because the US opposed any mention of the World Health Organization. Basically, with countries blaming each other and sniping at each other, we've been in our country comes first kind of environment where the type of multilateral cooperation we saw in the last crisis in 2008, 2009 has been much less effective. But there does seem to be a disconnect, which many have mentioned, between the state of the real US economy and the state of the stock market. This could be down to the prevalence in the major indices of tech giants, which are doing well in the crisis. It could be down to the unprecedented Fed support of financial markets, which even dwarfs what we saw in the last financial crisis. But my sense is that the market is a bit over-optimistic about how soon the disease can be brought under control, the extent to which consumers and producers will be willing to ignore it as they go about economic activity, and the consequent speed of reopening up the economy. We think that it will be a slow process because of the damage being done. The V-shaped recovery is definitely out the window. It is not going to happen. The question is, will it be a U? Will it be a W? Will it be some other letter yet to be suggested? And this is due primarily to the fact that we're not going to get a vaccine soon. We may get effective treatments against COVID-19 sooner, but until that happens, we won't be able to return fully to the type of economic activity we reached in the beginning of the year, beginning of 2020. The IMF is now saying that it won't be until 2023 that economies return more or less to normal. And it could be even longer than that, especially if there are political repercussions. Just to give one sort of indication of the difficulty of coming back quickly, a recent study by Nick Bloom and other researchers has indicated that fully 42% of the jobs lost so far will never come back. This is true in areas like airlines, obviously, movie theaters, many other areas. And so there has to be a vast reallocation of labor from these positions into new jobs, and that's going to take time. There will also be firms that go bankrupt, and the process of new business formation will also take time. So V-shaped recovery, not in the cards. Anyone looking at the sharp increase in the Federal Reserve's balance sheet might think that there is inflation on the way, but I think that's very unlikely. The fact that we will be slow to recover means that demand is likely to be depressed for a long time. Unemployment will remain above the natural rate for a long time. And if anything, especially with the fall in energy prices, expectations of future inflation are likely to remain depressed for a long time. So in that environment, it's hard to see how inflation comes roaring back. I think it would be a good thing to have a little bit more inflation, if for no other reason than to reduce the very large public debt burdens, which are going to continue accumulating as we recover. But to my mind, a bigger danger is that we remain in the zero interest rate environment with deflation as a threat, and that we have some inflation. At a historical turning point for the global economy. And we can see a lot of potential negative outcomes in terms of economic and political fragmentation going forward. I have thought of viewing it as an analogy to the two world wars in the 20th century. We could have a 1919 experience. By the way, a year also characterized by pandemic, in which our attempts to rebuild after the crisis fall into disarray and recrimination. And there's going to be a lot of recrimination to go around. The positive scenario would be one where economies and political systems find their bearing, realize that the vulnerabilities that built up in particularly in advanced economies in terms of inequality over the last decades were a big negative in terms of dealing with the corona crisis, and where countries realize that there will be future threats of a global nature, not just pandemic threats, but also the threat of climate change, require international cooperation. This will require some sort of big slap in the face, which wakes people up, and that would probably be an unpleasant experience. But it is possible that we will put together the lessons of the past and come to our senses. So far, that does not seem to be happening. We see recriminations between the US and China. We see disputes over who will get the vaccine first when it is developed, instead of the kind of global cooperative attitude that would make everyone better off.